So, wir sind wieder mal zurück mit Trails of Cold Steel. Und schon so ziemlich in den, in den letzten Zügen. Wir haben das jetzt mal mit dem Festival begonnen. Ich habe mit Absicht uns nur noch ein Festival-Ticket übrig gelassen, weil ab da wieder viel Plot kommt. Aber wir machen auch noch eine Sache, bevor wir uns der weiteren Story widmen. The Red Moon. Wir haben noch eine Lesestunde vor uns. Das letzte Mal hatten wir die Drama City. Jetzt haben wir die Red Moon Rose. Und ich schon sehe. Ach du Scheiße. Ey, gut, die Pages sind kleiner. Aber wir sind bis zu 30 Pages. Ach du Scheiße. Ich glaube, das wird mehr als nur eine Lesestunde. Aber okay. Fangen wir direkt einfach an, weil das wird sich ziehen. Chapter 1, The Red Moon. Our story begins in Erebonia during the Middle Ages, some 200 years ago. The War of the Lions had concluded in Western Cimmeria, and Emperor Traxus, a driving force behind its resolution, had been deceased for over a decade. The imperial capital, Heimdall, was a beautiful traditional city with rows of cheerful red brick buildings that had earned it the nickname of the Vermilion Capital. In one back alley of the city, however, a solemn mood reigned. Soldiers in the military uniforms paced up and down, while a crowd of onlookers gathered to see what was going on. They clung to the edges of the scene, refusing to disperse no matter how many times they were asked, at the center of the commotion lay a young woman. Her skin was shockingly pale, as if not a drop of blood ran through her veins. On her neck, two dark red spots stood out in stark contrast to the pallid flesh. Seeing this, a middle-aged soldier let out a loud sigh and took out his pocket watch. It was just under 6. He gave a curt order to his subordinates to find out who she was, and the woman's body was swiftly carried away from the curious stares at the gawkers. After watering her safely borne away, he noticed a younger soldier following the woman with his eyes as well. Alphonse! He tapped the young man on his shoulder. The soldier started, seeming to realize that he was still on duty. Sorry, Gerard. Someone flustered. Alphonse adjusted his spirit, then hung his head apologetically. Though snapped from his reverie, it was clear that he still had something on his mind. I believe I've told him before to address me as Sir while on duty. I'm your commanding officer, after all, Gerard said jokingly. With a fond pat on the shoulder, Gerard reminded him to stay focused and then left to give orders to the rest of his subordinates. Alphonse quickly returned to his post, silently grateful for Gerard's characteristically thoughtful gesture. Watching this exchange was another younger soldier, the same age as Alphonse. Scowling unpleasantly, he gave an audible tut. The girl's untimely demise, though shocking, was but one in a series of grisly murders that were the talk of the town. Most of the victims were young women who had been out at night, and they all had met their end through loss of blood. Or put another way, the victims had died after having all of their blood drained from their bodies. Also, eine typische Vampir-Story. Furthermore, all of the bodies which had been found had something else in common. Each had bite marks on their neck, as if they had been pierced by incredibly sharp fangs. It didn't take long for word of this to start to spread among the people of Heimdall, and all who had heard the rumors were quick to think of one of the many ancient legends which existed in Erebonia. Specifically, the legend that described immortal, monstrous creatures which roamed the land at night, feeding on the blood of humans. It was these rare legends that eventually became the inspiration of the mass-killing new moniker, the Vampire Murderers. That night, after his duty were completed, Alphonse made his way to a small tavern tucked away in a corner of the capital by the name of Allegria to enjoy a late evening meal. As he sat down to his dinner, a pretty girl near his own age, with a glossy chestnut ponytail, studied him with obvious concern. So how is it, Alfie? Is it nice? I hope so. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. The girl, Luca, had been Alphonse's friend since his arrival in Heimdall about 10 years ago. A shy and nervous smile tugged at her lips as she continued to watch him. Alphonse felt a hot blush creep up his neck under her intense gaze, but he forced himself to eat. The beef stew she had made had a simple yet comforting taste to it. Yeah, he assured her. It's really good. You've really gotten the hang of this. Luca relaxed at his words, and with a few quick, self-conscious glances at the rest of the tavern's customers, she seated herself opposite to them. Her courage seemed spent after this gesture though, and they sat in awkward silence for some time until she managed to ask them, "How's work going these days?" At word work, Alphonse's hand, which was carrying food in his mouth, instantly came to a halt. Despite the so-called vampire murders going on for quite some time, they had been unable to find a single clue to the culprit behind it all. The culprits of the wound from that afternoon flashed across his mind eye, and the pleasant flavor of the stew died on his tongue. So young. She must have had family, friends, perhaps even a partner, just like anyone else. She had had her whole life ahead of her, and yet that life had been brought to a sudden end, just like so many others before her. What the criminal had done was unforgivable, but the reprehensible nature of the crimes wasn't the only reason that Alphonse was obsessed with this case. Though sadly for him, there was very little that he could do to solve it now that he had been removed from the investigation team. Lucas, of course, brought him back from his sports. Evie, just don't go overdoing it, okay? The kind words made Alphonse realize how tense his expression must have become. The concerns embarrassed him. "I'm fine, honestly," he said in what he had hoped was a reassuring voice. Alphonse was a member of the unit of the Imperial Army popularly known as the Gerard team, which was responsible for maintaining law and order in Heimdall. Gerard, the team's commanding officer, had long cared for Alphonse like a father, and it was his recommendation that led Alphonse to join the army and had become a member of the team. Since then, he lived in a dormitory near the army's guardhouse. As Mia at the tavern finished, he sketched Luca a quick goodbye and took his usual road back towards the dormitory. An eerie red-colored moon hung full in the sky, bathing the brick buildings in a bewitching calm and glow. Walking along, Alphonse couldn't help but notice that the number of people on the streets at night was much smaller of late. Considering the culprit behind the vampire murders had been found, it was hardly surprising though. And despite the fact that barely anyone dared to take the streets, new victims kept appearing one after another, as if to mock the soldiers who withdrew in the dead of night to keep them safe. The sense of fear in the city increased by the day, and was a deep unease shared by all, even the soldiers. Suddenly, he swore to himself yet again that he would stop at nothing to catch whoever was responsible and bring them to justice. Suddenly, Alphonse stopped in his track. His troubled thoughts interrupted by the sight of an unaccompanied woman walking ahead of him. The deep shadows blanketing the path made it difficult to be certain, but she seemed unsteady on her feet. To his further surprise, she then turned and disappeared down an even darker back alley. Considering the ongoing vampire murders, it was hard to believe that anyone would be so careless. With a resolute air, Alphonse set about following that woman, determined to call out to her and try to prevent her from coming to any harm. He entered the back alley. Gloom obscured all but the sharpest of angles. He squinted, willing his eyes to adjust. The soft outline of a woman's back took shape in the depths of the alley. "Excuse me, I'm not sure it's wise to be..." Alphonse forgot what he was going to say. Something was wrong. Slowly, the woman turned to face him, her head hung limply to the side, long hair masking her face. Yet her eyes could be seen through the wire locks, but they held no focus, no awareness. She opened her mouth and moaned. Horrified by the disturbing figure before him, Alphonse froze. In an instant, she was on him. Arms outstretched, she lunged and seized his neck in a crushing grip. Taken already by surprise, he fell backwards, the weight of the pinning him down. Slowly, methodically, he began to squeeze. He growled. How could that seemingly lifeless woman be capable of such unnatural strength? No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't pry her arms from around his windpipe. All his training, his youthful strength, none of it seemed to count for anything against those unyielding claws. Her fingers stuck deeper still, and the already painful absence of air became indescribable agony. From his low vantage point, Alphonse was able to see more of the woman's face now. It swam in and out of view of his oxygen-starved brain, but her pale flesh was almost luminous against the darkness of the night. Her lips were chapped and colorless, As she squeezed, they began to part in a hungry leader, the edges splitting. Dinner! Although Alphonse could barely understand what was happening, his instinct knew exactly what the woman was about to do. He bucked and writhed desperately in her crib, but her hold was too great. Black began seeping into his vision. Even as he remembered the saber to his waist, he was too weak to draw it. The black-eyed woman thrusted her face eagerly towards his neck, teeth bared and mouth running wide. Alphonse began to close his eyes. Death seemed his only choice, but just then, the world in his fading view exploded. Exploded, okay. Ich hätte kaum nachreden. Kann wieder immer nur so eine kleine Trinkpause machen. Aber das ist mir Leute gewohnt sein, wenn die Lesestunden machen. Ich war viel nebenher. Chapter 2, Vampire Hunter. As the world blurred, he caught a fleeting glimpse of a geometric shape pass before his eyes. It was the sole of a boot moving at incredible speed. With a bone-crushing thud, the woman was thrown aside, and Alphonse's field of vision filled with the night sky. Free from the woman's grasping fingers, he coughed furiously, sucking in as much fresh air as his tortured throat could manage. "Are you alright?" asked a voice beside him. He saw it was a second woman, who he was certain had not been there moments ago. She wore a navy blue overcoat paired with a matching navy blue beret. Her ash blonde hair reached as far as her neck, and her features were dignified, though still retaining clear vestiges of childlike innocence. At a guess, she seemed to be roughly the same age as Alphonse himself. Still busy processing the events, so Alphonse made no reply to her query. The woman watched him for some time before coolly stating, "You appear to be mostly uninjured, at least. I'm glad to have arrived in time." Seemingly satisfied he would survive, she turned away and studied the crumpled form of the woman who had attacked him. "That," she said with a nod of distaste, "is a ghoul. A thing of a person becomes after their blood has been drained by a vampire." As she spoke, she kicked her left foot against the ground, then the tap, tap, tap seemed to punctuate each word. It appeared to be the boot that she had used to kick the ghoul, away from him. As he followed the restless strumming of her boot, suddenly thought, "Vampire? I have no issues with you arguing about, but I would prefer it if you stood aside before doing so. You're in my way." Her words were sharp, but no sooner had she sat down than a creaking sound filled the air. The ghoul, which had been motionless on the ground while they were talking, was now slowly rising. Its contorted body lifted from the cobblestones using only the power of its legs. It was a grotesque spectacle and utterly unnatural, and if the ghoul was buffered by the earlier blow, it showed no sign. Without a warning, the ghoul suddenly kicked at the ground like a wild beast and propelled itself forward toward them. Alphonse jerked to his feet and leaped forward to shield the brown woman. The exact moment that the ghoul made its breach of funds, the burnt woman behind him calmly put her hand into her overcoat pocket. In one smooth motion, she drew something out of it. It was a long, thin rapier. Its surface was radiant silver polished to a mirror-like sheen that reflected the smoldering glow of the red moon. Without a moment's hesitation, she thrusted the rapier forward. Its pointed end flew past his neck, piercing the ghoul's throat effortlessly. With an equally smooth motion, she withdrew the blade. The ghoul fell to the ground and didn't even move again. The menacing aura it had been radiating dissipated into nothing. Alphonse stood fixed on the spot, dumbfounded by what he had just witnessed. A small trickle of blood ran down his neck where the rapier had grazed it. "I do believe that I told you to stand aside. I suppose you must not have heard me." Sighing, she took the ghoul's body from the weapon before returning it to its scabbard. "After all, if you had heard me and acted that way regardless, I would be forced to conclude that you are most foolish indeed." Her blunt words and composed expression finally brought Alphonse back to his senses. "I was just trying to keep you from getting hurt, but my dad, what's going on here anyway? Who are you, and why was that woman trying to—" He intended to finish his sentence with the words, "eat me," but the possibility of what might have been was too terrifying to his voice. What was clear to him was that the woman before him had saved his life, and stabbed the ghoul to do so. Looking at Alphonse's confused expression as he wrestled with the situation, she gave a resigned sigh. You appear to be a member of the military, I presume, then? You're familiar with the so-called vampire murders? Yeah, of course. But then, if I were to tell you that those vampire murders really are the work of a vampire, would you believe me? Alphonse gaped at her. What? Without answering, she turned away from him and walked over to the goal. Gently, she lifted it from the ground so Alphonse could get a good look at the face. What had been a terrifying creature just moments ago was now a woman again. The expression was completely peaceful. It was hard to believe she was the same woman who had attacked him earlier. Look closer here. The blonde woman instructed. She pointed at the corpse's neck, specifically at the two red dots on its surface. They were completely consistent with the marks on all of the other victims of the vampire murders. It certainly looks like a vampire bite, wouldn't you say? She said this as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Alphonse still looked puzzled, but she ignored him and continued. Humans who die as a result of having their blood sucked by a vampire become ghouls, who then try to feast on other humans. The sword, she said, tapping the scabbard, has been blessed by the church and is capable of putting them to rest. The words brought the bizarre spectacle he had just witnessed back to the front of his mind. While he was interested in the church part of her statement, he had more pressing questions to ask. Ging das wer in Graz oder so? Is he saying that this was the work of a vampire? You would expect me to believe something so ridiculous? Whether you choose to believe it or not, it's the truth. A very unfortunate truth, but a truth nonetheless, she said in the same cool, disinterested tone. Alphonse struggled with it. The truth, as she presented it, begged belief. And yet, everything she said added up and seemed consistent. It was equally hard to believe that everything was a lie. He consciously touched his throat. The ache there only bolstered her position. He found himself willing to believe her. There's a vampire in the city, of that I'm certain, and I, she continued, placing a hand on her chest, am here to put an end to it. A period of silence followed, and the church the room began to talk again. Still, this is not ordinarily a matter that laymen should be involved with, so I do recommend that you forget all that you have seen and heard here. And I would prefer, she added, with a meaningful glance, if you kept all of this to yourself as well. She turned to walk away. Wait! Alphonse called out her. He stood a little straighter. Will you allow me to help you? The blonde woman came to an abrupt halt. She turned her head to look at him. It was clear that a sudden question had caught her off guard. Slowly, she faced him completely. Well, I certainly wasn't expecting you to propose something quite ludicrous. What could I possibly stand to gain by allowing you to help me? The tone was as sharp as ever, but Alphonse wasn't fazed. Around 10 years ago, both of my parents were killed. They died the exact way as the victims of the vampire murders. Shock showed through the woman's normally pink expression. Alphonse continued. I don't know much about the day, but there's one thing that I can't forget. One thing I will never be able to forget. As he spoke, I returned brutally to him. Roughly 10 years ago, Alphonse and his family had lived in a village in a remote region of the Empire. His father was a member of the army, serving in a unit stationed nearby, but it was an uneventful post. And they lived a quiet life. It was as normal and peaceful an existence as one could have until that fateful day when Alphonse returned from playing outside. It was then that he saw a sight that would be burned into his memories, his dreams, forever. There in his home, he found the corpse of his parents lying in a room stained with blood. Their bodies had been drained and the necks were marked by strange bites. The incident was so unpleasant and bizarre that even then there were those who believed that it was the work of a vampire. The army conducted an investigation, but were unable to find any clues that would lead them to a suspect. Eventually, the case was deemed unsolvable. Left with no living family, Alphonse was taken in by his father's best friend and followed her joined the army, Gerard, and ended up living in Heimdall. If what she was saying was true and vampires really did exist, then maybe she was actually responsible for his parents' deaths. From the look on her face, it seemed that she too thought it could be the case. Alphonse shook his head, though it was more for himself. It doesn't really matter if it was the work of a vampire or not. I feel as though by solving this case, I'll finally be able to move on from what happened that day. That's why. In a long silence fell between them. The blonde woman seemed to be deep in thought, and Alphonse waited patiently for a reply. Eventually, she let out a short sigh. As part of the army, you have access to restricted information on the murders. Perhaps your assistance might allow me to find the vampire more quickly. She put her hand inside her coat and took out a short sword with the same silvery claw as the rapier she had used earlier. This will allow you to fight against the ghosts and vampires. If you will be cooperating with me, I expect you to protect yourself. Everyone scanned her face. The expression clearly said that she wouldn't brook any nonsense. His resolve would need to be firm and unwavering, and he would need to be prepared to encounter more ghouls like the one from before. Furthermore, he would have to be ready to face the vampires that lurked in the city once and for all. With a resolute air, he accepted the sword from her. My name's Alphonse, but everyone just calls me Al. The blonde woman looked down at her now empty hand, and the corners of her lips quirked up slightly. She raised the edges of the skirt underneath her coat and gave him respectful courtesy. My name's Rose. I mentioned that our time together will be brief, but I look forward to working with you nonetheless. Das kommt direkt mit 30 Seiten. Ich habe das Gefühl, das ganze Ding wird noch mal ein bisschen länger. Chapter 3, Foreboding. The next morning, Alphonse found himself in his commanding officer's Gerard office. He had come to request permission to independently investigate the vampire murders. Gerard scratched his head before giving Alphonse a questioning look, his eyes filled with the kind of vitality one would expect from a much younger man. You want to pursue that case all on your own? Alphonse cleared his throat nervously. He was well aware that what he was asking was completely unreasonable. No, not on my own. The civilian has agreed to help me conduct my investigation. The two of us will be going together. It sounded pretty weak to him, but Rose had been adamant that he kept the truth for the matter to themselves. It wouldn't be to benefit of society for the existence of vampires to become widely known, she insisted. As such, try and arrange for us to be able to investigate the murders by ourselves without interruption. Aside from a cool farewell for now, that had been their last words before disappearing to the night. And what she said made sense. There was simply no way that Gerard would believe that vampires existed, even if it was a surrogate son trying to restrain him. After all, despite seeing a ghoul with his very own eyes, Alphonse still wanted to believe that it had all been a dream. To compound the problem further, for reasons that Alphonse wasn't privy to, Rose seemed opposed to anything other than investigating the matter covertly. As such, her joining the team formed to officially investigate the murders was off the table. Alphonse was therefore left with no choice but to propose the two of them investigate together in secret. Alphonse was not surprised and to see Gerard's less than relaxed expression. Listen, Al, as a guardian, I've got responsibility to look after you. That's why I want to raise you to be a fine soldier. Why I don't want you putting your life in danger for no good reason. Alphonse flushed. He had already been removed from the investigation from the team investigating the murders, as well as taking off night patrol duty. George was aware well of his fixation with the case. This was exactly why he was afraid that Alphonse might end up going too far in his attempt to solve it and get injured, or worse. Gerard, sir. I understand exactly what you're trying to say, and I appreciate your concern, but... Seeing Alphonse's determination, Gerard hesitated. The boy standing before him was calm with clear eyes. Where previously there had been recklessness, now purpose and resolve seemed to rule. After a lengthy silence, he let out a desire of resignation. You really do take after your father. He smiled fondly, but quickly switched to his official commanding officer voice. I expect you to give your utmost to successfully solving the mystery behind these murders. However, I approve of this mission only on the condition that you report daily on the results of your investigation. Yeah. Alphonse almost responded in his usual casual tone, but caught himself just in time. He coughed, cleared his throat, and stood to attention. Gerard chuckled. Just be sure not to put yourself needlessly in danger, understood? And if anything happens, inform me immediately. Yes, sir. Alphonse gave a deep bow, grateful for his guardian's kindness. I see that everyone went well, but it's good news. The two of them were in the corner of the shopping district, where the first victim of the vampire murders had been found. It was the middle of the day, but the alleyway in which they stood was gloomy and draped in shadows by the looming buildings that surrounded it. The second he had stepped into the narrow passageway, one had appeared out of nowhere just like the previous day. Because the place where Alphonse had been attacked by the ghoul the previous night was currently under investigation by the Gerard team, they thought it best to stay clear of it for the rest of the day. As such, they had decided to examine the scene of an earlier murder instead. Unlike the previous night, Rose had neither her coat nor her sword with her. Instead, she wore some dress in the local style. Anyone seeing her for the first time wouldn't be able to tell that she was anything more than a perfectly ordinary girl. According to Rose, neither vampires nor ghouls were able to operate in daylight, and thus battle-ready wear was unnecessary. Everyday clothing also had the benefit of allaying suspicion by blending in, she said. It was fine logic in theory, but with Alphonse the guard in his military uniform, they made for an unusual pairing. As such, Alphonse couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief when he realized how few people were in the surrounding area. The scene of the first murder still had a solemn air about it. Alphonse set about scouring the area, and as he mused over the case details involving the victims, a question came to mind. Thinking about it, I never heard about any of the earlier victims turning to ghouls. Is that because you've been feeling them? I'll shook her head. No. In previous cases, I was able to purify the bodies with thaumaturgy before they turned into ghouls. But I will not harm the bodies of the deceased if I can help it. Thaumaturgy, as Rose explained it, was the collective name of special techniques used by a small number of people belonging to the Septine Church, the Gralsritter. The power of thaumaturgy was also apparently the reason why Rose's rapier and Alphonse's short sword were capable of defeating ghouls and vampires. Curious, Alphonse asked Rose if she was connected to the church, to which she responded, "Feel free to think of it that way." He to probe her more on the subject, but she began explaining the particulars about ghouls, so he let it drop. Since the murders had started, it seemed that the time it took for a corpse to turn into a ghoul was decreasing with every kill. Alphonse's encounter with the ghoul the previous night was the first occasion that she had been unable to purify the victim in time. As such, she had been left with no choice but to fight. Still, that possibility was well within my expectations. It's not the first time it has happened after all. To someone like yourself who would appear and try to get involved certainly wasn't, however. Rose said with a giggle, causing Alphonse's ears to turn pink at the tips. Anyway, I said, crouching down to inspect the ground level. Have you managed to gather anything about the culprit from your previous investigations? Rose nodded. Judging by the bite marks left on the victims, I believe that the vampire is likely male. Furthermore, despite victims being found all across the city, the bite marks look the same as one another. That suggests the work of a single vampire. Beyond that, however... Rose was silent. Is something bothering you? Alphonse asked without thinking. Yes, actually. It may be possible that the vampire lurking in this city is... She stopped mid-sentence. Your gaze was focused on something behind Alphonse. Turning around, he saw a young man in a military uniform much like himself. It was someone he knew. Elroy, what are you doing here? Oh, I was about to ask you the same thing, the man grumbled. Elroy was a fellow member of the Gerard team who had joined around the same time as Alphonse did. That combined with the two being roughly the same age, you might expect them to get along well, but in reality they usually ended up arguing about everything. They had been like that for almost as long as Alphonse had known him. I heard you formed a separate team to check up on the murders, but I had no idea that it was just a pretext to be meeting a woman during working hours. Elroy sneered. Alphonse started his annoyance. At least it seemed as if the other man hadn't overheard their earlier conversation. Clearing his throat, Alphonse said evenly. She's a civilian who's assisting me with investigation. So knock it off. And you? What are you doing here? Nothing particular. I just happened to be passing by. You've got to patrol a much wider area now thanks to all this vampire nonsense. Alphonse stood and gave him a cold look. Watch what you're saying. You in this area have lost family and friends because of these murders. Elroy snorted and cast an uncaring glance at the spot where the first victim had been found. I mean, seriously? Vampire murders? You're supposed to be the Imperial Army and not a bunch of country bracers. Are you seriously considering the possibility that fairy tale creatures like that exist? And besides, what kind of idiot goes out at night when there's a serial killer on the loose? They're asking for it, if you ask me. Do you need to stay in your damn homes and stop making more work for us? You son of a... Enraged by the sheer carelessness of Elroy's words, Alphonse started towards him, or tried to rather. Strong and yielding fingers held him by the arm, completely expressionless, and without so much as a glance to Elroy, Rose whispered, I'll give him himself some purses. The time would be better spent on investigating. She spoke hobbling, but her words were sharp and dismissive. What she said was right, though, and hearing it was enough for Alphonse to cool his temper. As she said, they had more important things to be doing. He had sworn that he would solve these murders and put the past behind him, and that needed to be his foremost priority. He took a deep breath to regain his composure. The reassuring weight of the silver sword hidden in his uniform further reminded him of what he needed to do. Watching him airily give aboard the derisive laugh. Oh, and civilian helper or whatever you're, don't go wandering around at night either. The last thing the army needs is more dead bodies to clear up. And with a mocking wave, he left them. Was ein Arschloch. Was für ein Arschloch. Wundert mich aber auch nicht, warum diese zwei sich dann auch die ganze Zeit in den Haaren haben. After the inspection of the first crime scene, Alphonse and Rose spent the remainder of the day scrutinizing the scenes of the second and third murders. But in the end, their search yielded no fruit. After reporting the progress to Gerard, he made his way to the Allegria, where he had promised to meet Rose to discuss how they would proceed with the investigation. The city around him was bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun when Alphonse finally stepped into the sparsely populated tavern. He found Rose sitting at a table near one of the windows. Once again, she was wearing the navy coat from her first meeting. It seemed safe to assume that the rapier she used at night was inside it too. Evening, she called out to him. I was expecting you to be here sooner. Alphonse didn't reply. I was too busy staring at the girl sitting opposite her. What's wrong, Luca? We returned to the sound of her name. Eyes are wide and moist, her tears threatened to fall at any moment. Alfie, just what is this moment to you? What? Was that Rose had said? Perplexed, he looked over in Rose's direction, as if seeking explanation. Rose favoured him with a bland expression. All I did was walk into this tavern instead, more like an out-of-the-way table to discuss the future with Al. Viel missverständlich hat man es auch nicht ausdrücken können. And she has been pressing me with endless questions ever since. She sighed and shrugged her shoulders as if she understood the situation no better than Alphonse did. Seeing this, he let out an even greater sigh before Luca could launch into another interrogation. Alphonse set about explaining his role as a civilian helper aiding an army investigation, and after several reassurances, he was essentially able to clear up the misunderstanding. Luca's relief seemed to fill her with renewed energy. Cheerfully, she bounded up from the table and made her way into the back of the tavern again. With a tabacco, the two left the gazes of the other curious and amused patrons. Was an Alphonse spent to discussing the investigation. Vampires, Rose elaborated, were only able to use their power at night. During the day, they are no different from ordinary humans. Unfortunately, this meant that even if they were to encounter one, neither of them would be able to tell. If they hope to end the murders, they will first need to find some kind of clue as to the vampire's true identity. At one point during the conversation, Alphonse went pale at the thought that they might have to exhume the corpses of previous victims in order to investigate them, but Rose assured him that would not be necessary. To his great relief, she had already checked them thoroughly for clues. Even the gruesome task had yielded little more information than the similarities between the bike marks, though. The vampire foe was a cunning one. The number of bodies and lack of clues all pointed towards a careful killer who more than likely was living right among them as an ordinary human. After working their way through the simple meal that Luca brought them, Rose casually glanced over to the back of the tavern. "You seem rather close to the girl," she murmured. It took a few moments for Alphonse to realize who Rose was referring to. "Yeah, I suppose you could say that. I've known her for 10 years now, after all. I first met Luca when he was brought to Hamdallah by Gerard. Initially, he had stayed in a house near the tavern, and being brought by it often, the two of them quickly became friends. As an orphan, Luca's support over the years meant more to him than words could express." Telling Rose all of this, Alphonse could feel his cheeks heaving. He began fidgeting awkwardly. "I wanted to envy us," Rose said. As he spoke, Alphonse noticed a change in her expression and tone. Usually she said things sharply or with an air of cool detachment. Her face also rarely betrayed her inner thoughts. Now, though, he thought he caught a hint of loneliness. Unable to let this pass unnoticed, Alphonse opened his mouth to comment. Suddenly, Rose jumped out of her seat. The chair fell to the ground with a crash. Once again, the two of them became the subject of a room full of gazers, but she paid that fact no mind and stared out of the window, her eyes opened wide. What is it? What's wrong? Evans whispered loudly. It's nearby, I can sense it. What? What do you mean? The vampire? She hissed. No sooner had she said it, she raced over to the tavern's owner, who was busy at the back of the building. Evans chased after her. He had never seen her in such a panicked state before. Where is the young lady who was here earlier? Rose asked the puzzled tavern owner, who didn't appear to have any idea who she was referring to. It was then that Alphonse realized that he didn't see Luca anywhere, and hadn't seen her since she brought him the food a half hour before. After telling this to the owner, he finally seemed to realize what he was being asked. Oh, now that I mention this, I would have expected her to be back by now. I was going to run an errand over the grocery store opposite here. Alphonse and Rose exchanged a glance and instantly understood what the other was thinking. Overcome with a sense of great foreboding, the two of them rushed out of the shop without saying a word. Ich merke schon, meine Stimme wird nicht ganz so wieder mit sein am Ende. Chapter 4: The Black Blood Empire. Vampire. The people ran through the streets of Heimdall, down cobblestones dewed with moonlight. In the lead was Rose, her navy blue coat flapping in the wind like the wings of a hawk as she pursued the foe. Just behind her, and shocked by her speed, was Alphonse, head whipping left and right as he searched for Luca. There had been no signs of her on the short path between the tavern and the grocery store where she had already apparently been sent. When Rose had sensed the ominous presence of the vampire outside the tavern, she immediately set about following it. Alphonse didn't know what kind of tail she had picked up, but she flew down streets and narrow paths without hesitation as if following puppet springs back to its master. To find his friend, they now followed the vampire, spurred by the terrible certainty that the two were connected. The sound of a piercing shriek filled the air, sending it straight up Alphonse's spine and freezing him to the spot. There was no mistaking its honor, it was Luca's voice. Luca! Alphonse cried out. Where are you? The sound has come from this way, Rose called, before rushing down a narrow alleyway. Alphonse followed, stumbling over his own feet in his desperate attempt to keep up with her. He could barely breathe from running so much, but he ignored the tightness in his chest and sped on. Kicking aside boxes and garbage piles here and there on the path, he eventually reached the other side of the alleyway and emerged into a neighboring street. In it stood someone, or something. It was wrapped in a black overcoat. The upper half of his head wrapped in a large cloth, and not even its eyes were visible. The only part of the body that remained uncovered was the bottom half of its face. A deadly pale expanse of flesh with a twisted smile at its center. At first glance, it almost seemed human. Alphonse was not fooled. This is it, he thought. This is the vampire. It was then that he realized that the black-clad figure was holding something in its arms. Luca. Just as that realization hit, the vampire's rictus of a grin yawned wide as it opened its jaws. Alphonse caught a fleeting glimpse of beast-like fangs, too long, too sharp to be human. Seeing them, Alphonse instantly recalled the bite marks on the murderous victim's neck. As he watched, horrified, the needle-like teeth descended towards Luca's throat. Rose was the first to act. In a movement so fast he could barely track it, she withdrew several thin objects from the inside of her cloak and threw them at the vampire. Alphonse remembered her, showing him them as a part of her vampire hunting kit. The knives flashed in the moonlight as they sped towards the creature. As if it was about to sink its fangs into Luca, the vampire turned towards them, dodging the knives just in time. Luca fell to the ground, and the vampire jumped high into the air, descending just behind Alphonse. It happened so fast that Alphonse was still staring at the spot the vampire had been when it landed suddenly behind him. The creature that was terrorizing Heimdall, the murder of countless women, the thing that had attacked Luca, it was so close. Anger or both fear, Alphonse grasped the hilt of his military saber and drew it. He spun around, slashing horizontally across the vampire's chest. The blade made contact. The vampire laughed. Alphonse watched transfixed as the wound on the creature's chest healed. The next instant, the vampire punched its right fist out toward the pit of Alphonse's stomach at incredible speed. The impact was so great that it forced him back, expelling all of the air from his lungs. And while he was able to protect his vital organs, he had still suffered the full brunt of the blow. He doubled over in agony. Get down, Rose cried out from behind him. With no choice but to obey her as best as he could, he let himself fall limply to the ground. As he did, the stir of air from Rose's lang-faced rapier rustled his hair as it passed. The vampire didn't laugh this time. Perhaps sensing danger from the rapier's silver radiance, it threw up its left arm in defense. The blade pierced flesh, and Rose followed through her strike, skewering the limb right through the other side. The tip stopped just before reaching the creature's chest. White smoke poured from the wound. Unlike Alphonse's earlier attack, it seemed Rose had actually been able to damage it. Rose tried to move the sword, but it was stuck fast. The vampire smiled again. So you must be the vampire hunter responsible for sealing those ghouls. She ignored him and tried the sword again. It heard that many of vampire men had fallen at the hands of a vampire hunter. He continued in a low, sibilant voice. I certainly did not expect the hunter in question to be a girl. Rose gave a derisive laugh. Brethren, I think you will find that word is meant for humans, not beasts like your kind. The vampire resisted and she bared her teeth at it as they both fought for control of the sword. Rose tried pushing forward, urging the blade on while the vampire kept the muscles in his forearms as rigid as steel to thwart her movement. Still lying on the ground, Alphonse gathered just enough strength to begin crawling his way to Lucas' side. When he reached her, a quick check lessened the mad pounding of his head. She was unconscious, but otherwise unharmed. Willie forced over him. His voice brought Alphonse back to the situation at hand. She and the vampire were still locked together, each refusing to yield. If we were to stay here like this until morning, your power would be sure to weaken significantly. I'd be happy to spend the night with you until then, if you wish. She just said to it. He made an unsettling sound somewhere between a snort and a laugh. I'm afraid I will have to refuse a kind proposal, my beautiful lady. Not least because, thanks to you and your pitiful human friend, my evening meal has been rather spoiled. As out of those words, the vampire's outline began to blur. Alphonse blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision, but it was no trick of the shadows. The creature's form was dissipating into a fine black mist. Though its mouth was disappearing like the rest of it, its voice somehow carried on. Should I ever seek to disturb me in my dinner again, I'll be prepared for the consequences. And then it was gone. Silence fell. Gradually, Alphonse got used to the pain in his chest from the vampire's blow. He counted it good fortune that he'd only lost his breath and not broken any bones. With a fineness that he wheezed, he hoisted the unconscious Luca on his back and rose slowly to his feet. I guess that's not the end of our vampire then, he said unheavily. Rose was inspecting her sword for damage. Finding none, she returned to his sheath. Sorry. Turning about the body to mist is one of the many abilities vampire have. Escape from us this time, but I expect that it will take some days for its left arm to heal. At the very least, I think it's safe to assume that no one else will be attacked tonight. It sounds like vampires are unbelievable foes to be up against. It's a relief though, at least. Still, get it? You're pretty unbelievable yourself. I shook her head. The loss obviously rankled her. Next time, she said with steel in her voice. It won't get away. I'm going to find some stronger equipment and I'll finish it for good. Alphonse nodded. Next time they would have it. They might not have been able to defeat a vampire, but at the very least they had earned a short respite from danger having saved Luca, and not a murder from occurring. Without Rose's assistance, none of this would have been possible. Thank you, Rose. If you hadn't been here. She cut him off with a dismissive wave of the hand. There's no reason to thank me, I was simply doing my duty. He checked if Alphonse fell silent. But these murders are not over yet. We will need to discover the true identity of the vampire for that to happen. Yeah, he said at length. You're right. Anyway, we should go investigate another crime scene tomorrow like we discussed earlier. Indeed. Farewell for now. After she left, she didn't even wait for Alphonse's response. The fact that left him feeling even more downhearted. Considering all that he had been through that night. After Alphonse took Luca to her arm. As he walked, she finally woke up. Finding herself on his back, she flushed and stammered her way through his questions. She remembered nothing of what had happened to her, it seemed. Unable to tell the truth, Alphonse simply said that he had found her collapsed outside. It was probably just fatigue from work, he told him. Fingery seemed convinced. For a while, as he tried to feign cheerfulness to put her at ease, his mind was still focused on the battle earlier. He hadn't stood a chance against the vampire. He had even forgotten the silver sword that Rose had given him. In a battle, he had simply fallen back on his military training and used a saber. For the good that it had done. While he had at least been able to avoid getting in Rose's way, he felt ashamed as an Imperial soldier. Next time he swore to himself, he would not let her down. Would bring an end to the murders once and for all. As Alphonse hardened his resolve that night, Rose navigated the dark streets alone, her mind fixated on the past. The sight of Alphonse on the ground after being struck by the vampire, the image of his friend, who had almost lost her life and been turned into the ghoul, the version of that one cursed memory she had desperately fought to forget. I'm on the verge of making the same mistake a second time, she wondered aloud. She stopped in her tracks, a brow furrowed, an expression meek, and looked up to where the crimson moon hung like a great malevolent eye in the sky. Ja, ich denke mal, es werden 2 Lesestunden folgen werden. Wenn ich je nach Länge so 10 bis 15 Minuten für so für einen Chapter brauche fast. Chapter 5. Well, so this is the culprit behind the vampire's murders, you say? Girl peered at the sketch, her brows drawn down. The morning after Alphonse and Rose had fought the vampire, he had made sure to report the fact to Gerard. The sketch Gerard was studying had been outlined based on Alphonse's testimony. It depicted a figure dressed all in black with the upper face obscured. The portrait showed everything Alphonse could recall of the vampire's distinguishing features, in the hope that it would be helpful to the army's investigations. Actually, had left out how the suspect was actually a vampire and capable of turning himself into black smoke on a whim. Having his commanding officer think him crazy would help no one. The purpose of the sketch was simply to help people watch out for the culprit, not to try and convince them of its true nature after all. He did wish he could tell them the complete truth, if only to better prepare them for a potential encounter against the monster and help them more effectively hunt it, but he knew better than anyone that no ordinary human would be able to stand up to it. He had learned that much firsthand the previous night. Trying to fight a vampire would only lead to unnecessary fatalities, and organizing large teams to try and exterminate it would even lead to it hiding itself away, or worse, fleeing the capital and going elsewhere. As such, the best chance to defeat it, once and for all, seemed to lie with Rouse. Just straightened and fixed Alphonse with a concerned eye. Anyway, Al, I'm just glad that you and Luca are both alright. Then let out a relieved sigh, as if that genuinely was the most important thing to him. Description and portrait of the black-clad man would be used to encourage people to be more vigilant and watch out for the culprit. If the number of people going out at night were to decrease, the number of murders would likely decrease too. Gerard tried to convince Alphonse to rest for the day, not least because he had been injured the previous night, but Alphonse had no intention of listening. He and Rose had already decided to meet up and investigate further, he insisted. Gerard's brows descended once again at that. His parting words as Alphonse left his office were simply, just don't do anything to put yourself in unnecessary danger, alright? While he's usually strict as a superior, it was obvious that he genuinely cared for him like a real son. A fact that Alphonse couldn't possibly be any more grateful for. Feeling newly motivated, he quietly muttered to himself, I will stop these murders, as he walked towards the exit of the guardhouse. Just before he could set off his meeting with Rose, however, he encountered his fellow soldier, Elroy. The man looked as calm as ever. Judging by his appearance, he had just finished the morning's training. Beads of sweat ran down his face, and his hair was matted to his forehead. Despite this, he didn't seem the slightest out of breath. Elroy had always been that way, though he never seemed to train more than Alphonse and the other teams. He seemed significantly stronger and more capable than any of them. He was well aware of this fact too, and seemed to have developed a sense of superiority because of it. Bringing down his nose at the others was Elroy's signature move. But they seemed no different. He turned to Alphonse with a mocking smile on his face. So, you ran into the culprit behind those called vampire murders, did you? Yeah, I did. Elroy gave a contemptuous nod. Nah, this is then on you. Why didn't you catch him? This would have all been over if you had. As usual, Roy wasted no time trying to pick a fight with Alphonse. But this time he had no comeback. Roy is right. If he hadn't been so weak, he would have been able to defeat the vampire and stop the murders the previous night. Seeing Alphonse's reactions to his provocation, Roy folded his arms triumphantly. The commander might favor you, but I think it's about time you stop letting that get to your head and learn your place. Evans was about to retort when he noticed something. Roy's left arm was wrapped tightly in several layers of bandages. Well, we found our culprit. What happened to your arm? Evans pointed to the bandages with his finger, and for a brief moment Arrow seemed unsure how to respond. That? It's nothing really. I just heard it in the training earlier. Spots of blood peeked through the bandages, making it clear that it was a recent injury, at the very least. Evans looked at the damage with concern. This is why I can't stand you. Having thrown off by his teammate's worry, Roy gave an audible tut before walking away, leaving a slightly embarrassed Alphonse behind. While they were hardly on the best terms, Alphonse didn't bear any particular grudge against our boy. It was clear that the same couldn't be said for the other man, but Alphonse had no idea what he had against him. Getting out of sight, he returned his thoughts to the investigation at hand. Now wasn't the time to be thinking about Elroy. He had to focus with a shake of the head. He opened the guardhouse door and set out to meet Rose. They decided to continue their search where they left off, so it was the scene of the fourth murder that Alphonse met Rose. Despite scouring the area as thoroughly as they could, however, they found nothing that would help them identify the criminal. Eventually, Rose stopped to think for a while before proposing that they make their way to the street where they had encountered the vampire the previous night and search the scene there. Alphonse agreed. It seemed like a completely different place during the day. Still quiet that had marked the night, and were replaced with the cheaper chatter and the bustling of people examining the wares of the street stalls. Since the murders were known to happen at night, people seemed happy to go out about their ordinary lives during the day without a worry in the world. Taking care to avoid standing out too much, they walked side by side around the street looking for potential leads. It's hard to believe that we fought a vampire here last night. Footsteps curled up slightly. Most will find it difficult enough to believe that vampires existed to begin with. I suppose it makes the existence of people like me, who live to hunt those vampires, more believable still. Was that meant as a joke? Alphonse wondered. I tried to respond, he elected to remain silent. Unfazed, Rose set about analyzing the previous night's events. The scent given off by the vampire was the same as the one essence from all the other victims. At the very least, it seemed beyond a doubt that the vampire is the killer we've been searching for. A scent? Alphonse asked before recalling that Rose had mentioned something similar earlier than when they were trying to pursue the vampire the previous night. So we follow that scent, we can find out who the vampires? I'll check it out. I'm afraid not. As I said before, vampires are only capable of using their powers at night. During the day, they are no different than ordinary humans. In a colony, the scent that gives them away as being a vampire vanishes as well. They both knew that, ideally. The best way to defeat the vampire would be to strike during the day while it was unable to activate its powers, but without any clues as to the vampire's identity, they didn't have any chance of doing so. Realizing anew just how difficult the work of a vampire hunter must be, Alphonse admired Rose all the more for being able to cope with it. Nonetheless, we made contact with the vampires today, and I believe that's a big step forward for this investigation. After all, the more feels the better, the greater the chance that one of the participants may leave behind some incriminating evidence. There's always the possibility that they may have seen something too. Officer assumed that she was referring to Luca. He made to reply, but Rose was no longer alongside him. Turning around, he realized that she had stopped in her tracks some distance behind. Her face was as expressionless as ever, but her eyes were cast downward, almost as if she was regretting something. What's wrong? It's nothing, she said briskly and moved on. We should continue our search. They set about combing the streets for any remnants of the battle. At one point, Rose suggested that they split up to cover a wider area, but even after doing so and reconvening to discuss their finding, or lack thereof, they found themselves no closer to pointing the vampire's true identity than they were the previous day. The hour had grown late and the sun was beginning its slow descent in the sky. The warm glow of its fading rays deemed the red hue of the bricks even as the shadows cast by their sturdy walls lengthened. Evans grounds his teeth in frustration. I was searching and not a single result, damn it. Rose had said that vampire's powers had been increasing over time.
The previous night's battle had shown that she was capable of competing with it for now, and it was the fact that had allowed them to save Luca. But there was no guarantee that would always be the case. If it continued to claim more victims and grow stronger, seeing Alphonse's vexation or their lack of progress, Rose spoke. Never come from being too hasty. With our task, all you need to do is complete them. He nodded, knowing full well that she was right, but it was hard not to feel bitter about their lack of headway or the same. As they needed to go and report the results of the day's investigation to Gerard, they agreed to part ways for the time being. Alphonse proposed they meet again at the tavern, like they had the previous day, but Rose refused to sober. I'm afraid I have business I must attend to with the church. Oh, okay. After Robin will be able to patrol and keep an eye out for the vampire again though, since you're the only one who can sense its presence. Considering what had happened the previous night and the increasing occurrence of the murders, remaining vigilant for the vampire was the utmost priority, or at least that was Alphonse's thought on the matter. Rose didn't react to the disappointment in his trading words. Instead, she merely replied that she would watch out for it alone before excusing herself with a solemn farewell. There was a pause in which it seemed as if she wanted to say something else, but then she curtsied deeply and disappeared from his sight. Alphonse watched her go with an uneasy feeling in his gut. Something seemed off about her behavior. Unable to work out what it was, however, he was left with no choice but to watch her walk away into the distance. That night, Alphonse made his way to the tavern after giving his report to Gerard. Rose may have refused his offer to meet here, but he still wanted to look in on Luca after what had happened to her the previous day. Oh, hello, Alfie! Luca was quickly to spot him, and she showed him to a seat at the empty counter. After scoring his earlier bill from the dinner with Rose with the tavern owner, Luca excitedly came over to take his order. Seeing her smile and chatter as energetically as ever, Alphonse felt relieved. He had been expecting and fearing a more subdued demeanor from her. Watching her, he couldn't help but think how close she had come to losing her life, and for a pathetic reason like feeding a vampire. Just a thought made his blood boil. Alfie, are you okay? When his question made him realize that his anger must be showing in his expression. He quickly put on an awkward smile and set about eating to avoid having to explain anything. After a few bites, he felt himself calming down and gave her a more genuine smile. I'm fine, honestly, but never mind me, you haven't managed to recall anything about what happened last night, have you? She shook her head. Sorry, I wish I could, but I can't remember a thing. I hadn't really expected her to, but he was still slightly disappointed to not be able to gather any new information. Rose had speculated that the shock of seeing the vampire had caused her to subconsciously block any memories of what had happened. As such, it didn't seem particularly likely that she would be able to help them find the identity of the vampire on either side. Luca, meanwhile, was desperately trying to remember something, anything that would allow her to be of service to him. After mulling over it for a time, she suddenly let out an "ah" sound. It doesn't sound directly related to what happened yesterday, but that person you know was here earlier on too. I was momentarily puzzled. What do you mean? You know, bummed with the swish of her hair. The girl you were with yesterday. This hadn't dawned on him who Luca was referring to, but Rose had specifically told him that she wouldn't be coming to the tavern today because she had business with the church. A troubled feeling began to build in the pit of his stomach. Anyway, she just came and asked me a few things about yesterday. I couldn't really remember anything when she asked either, but eventually she seemed satisfied and then just said farewell and left. Farewell? The moment Alphonse heard those words, it dawned on him every time he parted ways with Rose. She always left with a farewell for now, but not today. When they separated earlier, she instead simply said farewell. He thought something seemed off about her at the time, and it was then that he realized that was the reason. After that, she must have come to the tavern where she was able to discover something from Luca. But if that were the case, what would she try to do next? Alphonse fairly jumped out of his seat, half of the food still on his plate, and dumped enough mirror to pay for the meal hurriedly onto the table. Hell? Luca goggled at him. Just keep the change. It was a second feeling of great foreboding in 2 days, and the first had been downright deadly. He rushed out of the tavern as fast as his legs would carry him onto the streets of Heimdall. The sun had long since set, and the deeply shadowed street welcomed him into the murky depths. Ich fange jetzt schon an, so ein leichtes Kratzen mal zu merken, wenn ich lese. Ich werde mal nach Kapitel 7 dann einfach mal eine kurze Pause machen. Also auch dann halt einfach Halbzeit ist. Chapter 6 Bloodstained Rose. The city of Heimdall was deathly silent. During the day, word had been spread throughout the populace from the Gerard team regarding the pirate group behind the vampire murders. Knowing specific details about the perpetrator instilled an even greater sense of fear into the people of the city, making them even more wary of stepping out of their homes at night. That the streets would be empty was an inevitability, yet on one dark avenue in the city, a petite woman walked alone, as if to defy all of that. She wore a plain, undecorated dress and from all appearance belonged to the middle classes. She walked quite quickly, the sound of her shoes against the ground echoing loudly in the empty streets. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her chest, almost as if embracing herself, and she was hunched forward, clearly afraid of something. Of course, it was perfectly natural for her to be afraid, considering that the majority of the victims of the city's serial murders were young women like herself. She looked around restlessly, carefully surveying her surroundings for signs of dangers before disappearing down a dark alleyway, a faint moonlight illuminating her profile as she turned the corner and cast a long shadow behind her, which slowly and silently began to enlarge. Gertrude's silhouette extended upward, the inky depth taking the shape of a man who loomed behind her. The figure was swathed in black, with the top half of its face covered. The bottom half remained exposed, revealing a wicked grin and sharp-pointed fangs. It was a vampire, a creature of legend. It stood silently behind a woman, very much real despite its supposed mythological standing. From the sable folds of the cloak swaddling its body, it slowly extended a pale hand. The fingers stretched forward, sharp-pointed nails gently swept aside the woman's shoulders, long blonde hair. Ah. This matron's rose. The toes brushed the back of her neck almost caressingly. The second it did, though, it seemed to sense that something was wrong. Its prey was behaving oddly. It hadn't expected the frail creature before to put up the slightest resistance. She should have frozen at his touch or given into despair, having no choice but to succumb to the inevitable and have the blood drained. What it fell from her instead, however, was defiance and danger. This one was no prey. Hunter had met Hunter. The creature tensed, ready to leap backwards. Too late, it realized another threat radiated from directly beside it. There was no riding it. The sound of paving stones crackling sounded in the still night. Then his outstretched right arm was suddenly shredded by numerous sharp objects. The vampire let out an involuntary hiss of pain as a wave of silver blades arced through air and flesh, one after another, but the attack was normal. The vampire sensed danger from below too, and the blades which impaled into the ground suddenly arced upwards with alarming speed, as if retracing their path through the air. Just as the blades were about to sever its right arm from his body once and for all, it was able to jump out of the way. Cutting his mangled limb, the vampire edged further back to put distance between itself and the woman. It watched balefully with narrowed eyes as the razor-sharp segments that pierced its sword back over to the bladeless handle in the woman's hand. When she had drawn it, it didn't know. Connected by sturdy steel wires, the segments interlocked one by one, eventually forming a complete blade known as a Templar sword. She swung it, shaking the blood from its surface. A last trace of the weakness she had shown earlier when hurrying through the night was gone. She turned around, finally revealing the dignified, expressionless face that had lain on the other side of the sleek, blonde curtain of hair. It was the vampire Hunter Rose. So you were trying to lure me out, were you? The vampire sneered. Ha, such cunning. His words were sharp, but it literally felt somewhat tremulously on the rough cobblestone of the empty alleyway. "You flatter me," Rose said. The temporal sword still raised in her right hand. She put her left hand into her pocket and pulled out an unbelievably large caliber pistol, greater in size than those used in the army. She aimed it at the vampire's forehead and pulled the trigger without a moment's hesitation. The gunpowder flashed, illuminated the alleyway briefly. And a single blessed silver bullet flew from the muzzle with merciless intent. Such was the force of the discharge that an ordinary person's shoulder would have been dislocated, but Rose didn't so much as twitch. The vampire moved with liquid speed, dodging the projectile just in time and slipping behind Rose. On the slightest perturbed by its change in direction, Rose moved as well and kept the pistol focused on the creature, tracking the vampire's every movement. "You could have fleeing, if nothing else," she said coolly. "But if I did something like this, then," the vampire asked. As it spoke, it fluttered the black garments it was draped in, and they began to expand, the folds stretching to impossible size before her eyes. Beautiful moments echoed in the dark depths. Rose watched with narrowed eyes as a number of ghouls crawled out from within, as if emerging from thin air. 5, 6, 7. Eventually, she counted 10 in all. It hadn't been 24 hours since the previous battle. The vampire couldn't possibly have attacked that many people in time. Rose's mouth tightened. I see. And here we relieved the reported murders to be the only victims, but that wasn't the case at all. You're abducting others who had no living relatives to notice that they were gone and keeping them locked up somewhere around you. Precisely. The vampire aren't on the loose. I had to make sure I had some food in reserve. I'd rather not run the risk of going hungry, you see. The report makes me feel physically ill, Rose replied quietly. With which is saying, she tore the dress she had worn as a disguise from her body, and even sturdy leather gloves designed with mobility in mind were revealed. Attached to them were numerous balls holding large guns, knives, and other anti-vampire weaponry in place. It was clear at a glance that she was well prepared for battle. The sight of Rose's arsenal coaxed a sickly smile from the vampire. "Go forth, my minions." And with a wave of its pellet hand, the ghouls leaped forward. Das wird alles gut, aber okay, passt. "Where are you, Rose?" Alphonse shouted between pans as he ran back and forth across the city. Desperate searching for her. Try as he might, though, he could find no signs of the blonde woman. Even his fellow soldiers patrolling the cities had seen nothing. Alphonse had a very specific reason for pursuing this case, and he didn't intend to lose this opportunity to put the past behind him. That was what led him to propose that he and Rose work together. A proposal which she had accepted, and that despite all that she was trying to fight the vampire all on her own. It was too risky even for her. His mind was full of worry for her, and that fear conjured forth the image of his parents' dead bodies. Never again. He never wanted to see a sight like that again, wishing over and over again that Rose was still alright. He raced on, and it was then that he heard a sound that caught his attention. The clash of battle. As soon as the noise reached his ears, he quickly surveyed his surrounding. A source seemed to be in an alleyway nearby. Without a thought spread by from his own safety, he rushed into the alleyway. Then I believe a sight met his eyes. 2 ghouls lunged at her. Sheathing a temporal sword into its scabbard, Rose threw a second large pistol in its place. The ghouls swung their fists and dragged nails toward her with inhuman power, but she dodged them gracefully. As she spun out of their range, she aimed one pistol at each ghoul's forehead and pulled the trigger simultaneously. Flesh and bone were obliterated instantly, the sheer force of the blast and the mangled remains somersaulting backwards through the air. The move left Rose slightly unbalanced, and as if seeking to take advantage of that, 3 more ghouls flew at her from outside her field of vision. The mere sound of their movement was enough to alert her, however, and without even turning to face them, she sent 2 more bullets through the heads of the 2 ghouls charging her from the sides. Before the ghoul's mouth distended, seeking to crush Rose's skull with its teeth, but she danced out of reach, answering the pistols. Fluidly, she then flipped back through the air, throwing a Templar sword at the same time and slicing the lower half of the ghoul's body from the upper body in one swift stroke. She ran gracefully and kicked the ghoul she had just cut in half out of the way without even waiting for its body to hit the ground. 2 more ghouls approached from the fringes, but without waiting for them to draw closer this time, she swung her blade horizontally through the air. It split into pieces, and the countless segmented parts pierced the ghouls' necks. that dropped to the ground like fruit falling from a tree. 7 of the ghouls incapacitated in what seemed like an instant. Rose turned her attention to the defiantly grinning vampire and the remaining 3 ghouls with him. She drew the 2 pistols from around the waist the second time and sprinted towards them, showering them with the remaining loaded bullets. The vampire evaded the projectiles by using the remaining ghouls as shields. Out of bullets, Rose threw her Templar sword and swung it in the direction of the vampire's neck in one fluid motion, seeking to decapitate it. The next instant, the high-pitched screech of metal against metal filled the air. The vampire had drawn his own weapon from inside the black garment. It unrolls his blade in midair. The 2 swords locked against one another, filling the air with sparks and leaving them in a stalemate reminiscing of the previous night's battle. Impressed on how unfazed you see him fighting against those ghouls, the vampire said, teeth bared but with a slight curl to its lips. I expected a human to at least hesitate when being forced to fight their own kind. They ceased to be my kind the moment you drank their blood. They are nothing but soulless puppets now. Why would I hesitate against them? The creature inclined and said, almost respectfully, that, you certainly think like a vampire hunter. The sound of metal against metal continued to reverberate throughout the area. Drinking the blood of the ghouls had allowed the vampire to become even stronger than the previous night. Its once crippled right arm had already healed and regained its original form. And so Rose met it with any sign of restraint, his strength matching that of the fell creature before. Roar! The loud war cries split the air, startling both combatants. The third figure suddenly burst into the scene. The charging figure was dressed in an army uniform and brandishing a silver sword. It was Alphonse. Catching the vampire off guard, he slashed at its side. With no experience with the weapon itself, it was a shadow attack and the damage it dealt far from lethal, but it was enough to break the stalemate. Seizing the opening, Rose forcefully knocked the vampire's sword out of the way and in one following motion slashed horizontally from its exposed chest to its left arm. A crimson gout of blood arced from the wound, splashing the cobblestone. Something also sheared off from within the vampire's garment and flew into the air. The vampire clutched its chest in pain, but it was clear that the attack had only grazed it. It seemed that, once again, the creature's preternatural speed had saved it from mortal injury. Starting from... So, ja, gerade das sei und das nochmal gerade mein Kopf darauf zu fokussieren, dieses scheiß Wort zu lesen. Starting from one to the other, it backed away with an audible It looked like odds are stacked against me. A retreat for today, it said. Its outline growing dim before it turned to mist and vanished into nothingness. After a moment of heavy silence, Alphonse sheathed his sword, staring the spot where the vampire had previously been. Got away again. While looking at Rose let out a sigh of disbelief. Why did you come? In a coldness in her voice, Alphonse lost his composure. He seized her shoulders in his hands. Of course I came, he hid. What are you thinking, trying to fight him on your own? It's so dangerous to take him on without help. Her cool blue eyes locked with his. Dangerous? For me? Do you honestly believe that? She asked. Her face was as mask-like as ever, but the tone had dropped from chilly to downright glacial. It had a cooling effect on Alphonse's anger. He took a step back and looked at her from top to bottom. Illuminated by the light of the moon, he could see that she was covered in gore. He released her shoulder and stared down at his own hands. They too were now wet with blood from touching her. And yet, there was not so much as a scratch on her whole body. The filth covering her entirely belonged to the ghouls she had defeated. I'm a vampire hunter, and this is not the first vampire I've hunted. I've killed more of them than you could possibly imagine. I was going to deny what she was saying. He had seen for himself the skill and grace she had shown when visually slaying all of those ghouls, unmoved by the fact that they were once humans. She had been an artist in battle, the sword her paintbrush. What he had witnessed was beyond his comprehension, a struggle between monsters rather than human beings. That was why he could do nothing but stand and watch at first, and in between the reading. He was lost for words. Rose broke the silence with a short fussy laugh. I have no further need for your assistance. I suggest you forget about all of this and return to your ordinary life. Julian gave a respectful curtsy, much like the one she had when they first met. Das zieht sich. Gut, machen wir auch noch Kapitel 7 und dann, wie gesagt, mach ich für mich mal eine kurze Pause. Ups. Fast mal Control reingelassen. Chapter 7, Parting of the Ways. I have no further need for your assistance. His mind still reeling from the skill that Rose had demonstrated in her earlier battle. The only way he could react to her word was with dumbfounded silence. There were plenty of ways he could have argued back, not least by pointing out that he had yet to discover the vampire's identity. That the reason she had originally agreed that they worked together was so that he could use his position in the army to aid her in doing so. As of reading his mind, she said, "I still discovered the identity of the vampire this afternoon. As such, there is no longer anything you can do to help me." His initial reaction was doubt. How could she have possibly been the only one to discover the vampire's identity when they had conducted the investigation together? But then it hit him. They hadn't always been together. They split up to investigate a wider area today too, and if she had discovered a wider clue during a period where they were acting separately, it made perfect sense that only she would have worked out the truth. I tried again, but still, I found reasons for wanting to see this through to the end too. I couldn't just go back to living as if none of this ever happened. Alice knew this already, of course. They had told her about his parents, murdered once already, and made her realize that the two cases might be connected. She sighed, her reaction making it perfectly clear that pointing that out would do nothing to change her mind. She met his eyes again, unwavering the slightest as she said, "Allow me to put my position to you more bluntly. You're not a help, you're a hindrance." It was as if a sharp blade had pierced his chest. Her words left him shocked and speechless. She continued, "I'd have thought that anyone who looked around would be able to realize that this is not a matter that ordinary people can, or should, involve themselves in." As she spoke, he gestured in the direction of the goods, or human corpses that were once goods, littering the surrounding area. Some were riddled with bullet holes, some had smashed skulls, some had no heads at all. The words caused Alphonse's memory to run once again to the battle he had witnessed. Even if he had tried to intervene earlier than he did, would he have been able to do anything? No, on the contrary, it was easy to imagine him getting in Rose's way, becoming a liability, interfering with her ability to fight. Alphonse looked down at the ground dejectedly. It was galling to hear and realize that he might be useless in this. Rose opened her mouth to continue, her gaze somewhat distant. "A long time ago, I tried to pursue another vampire with the help of a civilian just like you. I was hesitant at first, but after he insisted so vehemently, I eventually accepted." I was looked up, stunned at what he was hearing. He had assumed that he was the first person to assist her. He was killed by the vampire, and we were pursuing. After that, the vampire disappeared, never to be seen again. It was clear by the pain in her voice that for someone whose lives revolve around killing vampires, there could have been no worse outcome. Of all the jobs I've undertaken, that was my worst failure and the most terrible stain on my record. I will not allow something like that to happen again. As such, I have always tried to keep you at arm's length. All I wanted from you was you to make it easier for me to conduct my investigation and find out what I wanted to know. I was just using you all along. She continued on, telling that everything had gone that way she hoped it would, perhaps even better. Thanks to his contribution, she had been able to discover the identity of the vampire, and the army was able to find out what it looked like, helping them to keep people off the streets and allowing her to successfully lure the vampire out. For that, at the very least, she was grateful. Alphonse could only stand and listen as her cold words splashed over him, the meaning of what she was actually saying, not truly singing. She fell silent for a moment and took a deep breath before starting again. The worlds we live in are just too different. We should never even have met. And yet, by coincidence, we did. But that's all. Now you need to forget that it ever happened and go back to the life you should always have lived. Besides, as a vampire hunter, the only life for me is one of solitude. She gave a small, self-deprecating smile before turning to walk away from him. Seeing that smile and hearing what she said, something struck Alphonse's arm. He could not call her out to her. It was as if there were an impenetrable wall between them now, stopping him from interacting any further with her. I can take care of everything by myself now. All I ask for you is to stay away and let me do it. Yeah. She said a final words as she walked, without so much as turning to face him, and then disappeared. Into the dark night. Left behind, Alphonse stood alone, frozen to the spot in a sea of blood. The next day, 10 identified bodies were discovered in Heimdall and the surrounding area filled with disorder, the likes of which had never been seen before. The researchers moved to and fro, surveying the area under Gerard's direction, while crowds of curious onlookers tried to get a closer look at the gruesome display. Alphonse, who had been removed from the main investigation team, had been called in to assist this time. Alphonse had expected the bodies to be heavily disfigured from most attacks, but when he reached the scene, there was no evidence whatsoever that the previous night had even taken place. The marks on the bodies were the bite marks left by the vampire. At first, the fact confused him, but then he remembered that Rose was somehow connected to the church. It seemed quite possible then that she would have worked alongside others, one or more of who may have arrived later to disguise any evidence of their involvement. After all, the church had the ability to purify weapons to allow them to contend with vampires. The possibility that they might also be able to put corpses back together was hardly a stretch after all. The things he had already witnessed. Based on how ludicrous that would sound to the average person, he could only laugh to himself on his breath. There was no sign of Rose in the scene, although Alphonse hadn't really expected that she would appear to begin with. She had made it clear the previous night that the original arrangement was over. Most likely Rose would go on to bring an end to the vampire murders herself in secret. But the culprit never apprehended, and the fact that vampires actually existed never being revealed to the world. But could he live with everything ending that way? There was still one burning doubt in Alphonse's heart, a lingering unease that refused to go away. The expression on her face she had turned to walk away. As a vampire hunter, the only life for me is one of solitude. That may have been what she had said, but the sad smile on her lips when she did so told a different story. Coolness underlying with resignation. Her words had been blunt, but to Alphonse they also seemed tinged with loneliness. Alphonse found himself reflecting what loneliness meant to him. It was a feeling he was all too familiar with after losing his parents. In the blink of an eye he had been left with no one who cared for him, no one who would be kind to him, no one who would look out for him. It was easy to imagine how being placed in a situation like that would gradually eat away at a person. Fortunately for Alphonse, his father friend Gerard had out a hand of salvation to him. And he later met others like Luca who cared for him, and he for them. It was thanks to them that he was able to free himself of the loneliness that may have otherwise consumed him. Nonetheless, the experience had taught him exactly how painful living like that could be, and that humans could not completely live alone. Rose, however, had said that living in solitude was the only life for her. But did she honestly mean it? Or did she really long to break free from it? That something was stopping her from doing so. With the memory of his own experience still painful even after all those years, Alphonse couldn't stop wondering. That was when he made up his mind. He wouldn't just leave things as they were. Rose may have cast him aside, but he had long ago decided what he needed to do to put the past behind him, and no matter how much danger he risked doing it, or how much no matter how much danger he risked doing it, or how much he tried to stop him, he was determined to see it through to the end. Schwartz got confused. If that meant he might be a hindrance to her, so be it. This was his fight, as much as hers. Alphonse shook his head furiously from side to side, as if to divest himself of the doubts and hesitation that had been filling his mind since the previous night. Focusing on the task at hand, he set about frantically investigating the area. As he had felt, it was the only way for him to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with her. Time dragged on as the search continued, and the receding rays of the setting sun began to blanket the scene in warm apricot hues. The 10 corpses had been carried away, and the vast majority of onlookers had dispersed. The large number of soldiers who formed the investigation team had also reached the stopping point in their investigation, ready to return for the day, but Alphonse waved them off, still silently combing the area for clues. Come on, Al. It's time to get back to the guardhouse of the day. The concern in Gerard's voice was obvious, but Alphonse only spared him a tight smile. Soldier, just let me look around a bit longer. Considering the intense battle fought between Rose and the vampire the previous night, there was every chance that something may have been left behind that might help guide him to the vampire's identity. The investigation team had found no such thing despite spending the entire day looking, but it did nothing to dampen Alphonse's spirits. There was something here, he knew it. Seeing Alphonse's determination, Cheryl couldn't help but smile in return. Alright then, have it your way. Just make sure you stop and come back if you get too tired. And with a backwards wave, he walked off to join the other soldiers as they returned to the guardhouse. Silently thanking Gerard for his kindness, Alphonse went back to scouring the alley. Another half hour passed by, Alphonse methodically swept his eyes over every nook and cranny. As the light from the dipping sun retreated from the sky, he began to feel his time was up, but just then his eyes were drawn to a point between two of the buildings. It was a narrow gap, overlooked in the investigation where something might have fallen. Indeed, he spied a barrier of shapes on the ground. On spotting it, Alphonse remembered seeing something fly from the vampire when Rose had landed a glancing slash on his chest. He got shown to inspect his space. The gap between the buildings was so narrow that his arms could barely fit inside. He stretched out his fingers, desperately trying to reach the fallen object, and eventually managed to catch it between his index and middle fingers. It was a narrow, rectangular piece of cloth. Alphonse stared at it, analyzing every last detail of its surface. It was a filthy gray in color, most likely meaning that it had been white originally. It was also clear that it had been separated from something while it was a sword. Other than that, it looks like an ordinary piece of cloth. It would have been nothing of interest at all to anyone just passing by. Rather than Alphonse, that is, looking at it, he finally understood everything. The reason Rose had suddenly chosen to part ways with him, and the true identity of the vampire was terrorizing the city. Break time! Auch gerade für mich ganz gut, weil ich brauche eine Toilettenpause. Das heißt, Lesestunde Part 1 durch, wir machen Part 2 nach der Pause weiter. Bis gleich.